This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Bob Fritz. Bob has over 30 years of experience in business management and human resource development, including senior roles at Eastman Kodak. He is currently serving as an adjunct professor at Bellarmine University and the University of Louisville, and he does consulting for the Delphi Center. His clients have included several Fortune 500 companies. His teaching areas are change management, leading change, organizational development, leadership development, and behavioral economics. He has some very intriguing perspectives that I asked him to come on the podcast to share with us today. So welcome to the podcast, Bob.
Thank you.
Now, as you know, we usually start by getting to know our guest a little bit better and ask them a couple of quirky questions before we transition into the content. So my first quirky question for you is, tell us, what is your favorite guilty pleasure television show?
Yeah. Oh, it's Survivor. I really enjoy watching Survivor. I think it's intriguing. And it's an area of interest as well, because as you look at the contestants vie for relationship and earning trust, and they speak about how important trust is, but then throughout the show, oftentimes they fall down on building those trustful relationships. So it's a good learning experience.
Absolutely. So do you have a secret desire to be on Survivor too?
No way. Not at all. I enjoy the creature comforts.
You don't want to be eating bugs and starving and all that stuff.
Oh, man.
All right, cool. All right, so my second quirky question is, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
Yeah. Well, in 1 year, I climbed and walked the Great Wall of China, rode elephants in Thailand, and dove the Great Barrier Reef. As I'll share with you shortly, I spent 2 years in Asia, which was a wonderful learning experience for me.
Very cool, very cool. Now, after that year, do you what can I do to top all this? Very cool, very cool. All righty. And now for something a little more serious. So what is your story? What happened in your life that got you to a place where you cared about helping others become better leaders and better managers?
Yeah. Well, my career started with Kodak. I spent 16 years in sales, marketing, and sales management. And it was through that process in understanding customers and the importance of getting the customer to trust you, trust your judgment, and building that relationship. At the time, I didn't realize that, but as I think back on that, how important that was. Then I had an opportunity to get into human resources, and I went into training and development, and did some time in strategic planning. And it was in strategic planning where I facilitated a lot of the planning sessions for Kodak senior management. And we were being threatened by Fuji, being threatened by digital technology, and it became a real learning experience for me, because at the same time I was getting my master's in organization development. And from that, I had the opportunity to spend 2 years in Japan as Asia Pacific Training and Development Director. Another great learning opportunity, because they do things very differently over there than we do. And I learned that differences are really a learning opportunity. They don't have to be dangerous. And then I came back to the United States, where I was the HR director for one of our divisions, an aerospace division. And we had to go through quite a transformation from a business perspective. We used to do all of our business on a cost plus basis. If it cost us $10 to build it, we would add 10% after everything was done. And then the technology, which was imaging from space, became commercial. Thus you have Google, you see all of the maps there. Well, when they sent up imaging systems, it wasn't on a cost plus basis. You had a bid, and that was a firm fixed price. And so it was a real learning exercise for us. Had an opportunity to take an early out, which was very generous, and moved back home to Louisville, Kentucky. Then I got involved in consulting for two large companies, Right Management, a division of Manpower, and Global Resources. And then for the last 6 years, I've been teaching at Bellarmine, and the last 4 years at the University of Louisville.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that background, giving folks a perspective there.
Yeah.
Now, when we spoke originally, you said that you had a passion for discussing the undiscussable.
Yeah.
So, could you talk about what that means and why it might be important for us to discuss the undiscussable?
Yeah. Well, as I'd mentioned, when I was in strategic planning, we had discussions about digital technology. And I can remember senior managers saying, as soon as digital technology becomes as profitable as film, then we'll invest in it. 1976, a fellow named Sasson, engineer for the Eastman Kodak company, invented digital technology. Kodak invented digital technology. We feared it would cannibalize our film products, and so it became an undiscussable item as a result of that. Other examples of undiscussables. I'm sure many of your viewers have gone to project management meetings, okay? Project manager will get up there and wax eloquently, and everything is green, 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 and everybody in the room starts looking at each other, knowing that it's behind schedule. No one says anything. And so important feedback that people need to improve their performance, they don't get that. It becomes an undiscussable. And there's a number of reasons why people don't do that. They feel being shot as a messenger. They may feel embarrassed. They may feel retribution by the person you're giving feedback to. But it's those undiscussables where the true information lies that will help an individual or a person move forward and become successful.
So, I do you mind sharing more about the Eastman Kodak example? Because, I mean, that ultimately became a issue.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We missed a number of opportunities there. At the time, I was getting my master's degree, and part of that was researching a fellow named Chris Argyris, and talked about some of his seminal work was in organizational defensive routines. And as I reflect back now, we set up these barriers to discussing the important things. You would risk being shut out, maybe from getting the budget that you needed for your own area. And so these items, the discussion was stemmed by, let's say, the people who were in power with the film. Clearly, they felt threatened by digital technology. So rather than seeing that as a learning opportunity, we kind of doubled down and invested ways to make film better and less expensive. But in the end run, we could not do that.
Yeah. Now,
and so,
go ahead.
The discussions that took place that could have helped us learn about using the technology that we invented did not happen.
That sounds crazy to
Yeah.
well, now in retrospect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did the employees could the employees see the handwriting on the wall and wonder why the executives weren't doing anything?
Yeah. I think at that time that digital technology was so new. I don't think it really had filtered down to the employees maybe outside of our research area. Many of our knowledgeable middle management people left the company because their voices weren't being heard, and they went on to places like Apple and became quite successful.
I think there's a lesson there for us. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And it's not that I want to put the blame on the Eastman Kodak company, but I think one of the things we have to understand, it's a natural human process to resist change.
Yeah.
Argyris would say, we ask ourselves unconsciously, am I threatened? Will I be embarrassed? Do I lose control? Those are the things that are going through our mind. So we have to find ways to understand that this is a human process, and introduce practices and processes that allow us to have those types of, quote, uncomfortable discussions.
So what do you recommend? How do you get people to discuss the undiscussable?
Yeah. I think there's a number of different types of things. Let's take a look at it from a leadership perspective first. Can leaders create an environment that will allow those types of discussions take place? A colleague of mine, Dr. Cumberland at the University of Louisville, just did a research paper where she went out and interviewed undercover bosses. And I know your viewers have seen that. Bosses disguise themselves. They go out and they talk to the line level workers, those people on the front line. And he builds a relationship with them. They open up and tell him or her things that they've never seen, that never filtered up to the top. So that's one way of doing it, but it's a very expensive and slow way. So let me give you an example. When Mullally became CEO of Ford, Bill Ford intentionally went outside of Ford, bring an executive in, because he knew how steeped the Ford culture was. And it was a culture where you didn't bring forward bad news. They would have, I don't know if they were monthly, but he told the story at the Louisville Chamber of Commerce that he went to the project management meetings, and everybody's going up green, green, green. And finally, one brave soul got up and said that his project went yellow. He said, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. Everybody was quiet. He said, I got up out of my seat, started clapping my hands and walking forward and saying, thank you for bringing that forward. Now we have time. All right, folks, how can we help him get back on? And so that mere act created a culture in which people could bring forward bad news. So there's one example. Anne Mulcahy at Xerox, one of the things that she did was that she would often get up and give her thinking first. And she noticed that everybody agreed with her. And so on the advice of a coach, she said, present the problem and say, I really need to understand your ideas. And so that changed the dynamic. And also, when she presented her thoughts, she would say, I think this and that because of this and this. How do you see it? I really need to make sure we are understanding this. So those are a couple of leadership actions that can take place to begin that discussion, if you will, at the senior level.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Are there any particular go-to questions that you gave those examples? Are there some go-to questions that leaders can ask of employees to try to let them know they're serious? They really do want that feedback and that input.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the challenges with conversations, discussions, if you will, is that people talk over each other. They are more intent in winning their argument than really learning about what other people say. At Commercial Government Systems, one of the things that we initiated for our strategic planning, because we were an engineering organization, it was either on or off or black and white. And so the value there was to win the argument. So one of the things that myself and the president initiated was what we called the 2-minute platform. And what this is that when we had a contentious topic to discuss, we gave them ample opportunity to prepare for it. And everyone would have 2 to 3 minutes to present their views. And everyone had to listen. They could not challenge. The only thing they could do was ask clarifying questions to gain a better understanding of what that person was saying. And the first time we did that, I facilitated that. The person didn't even get 30 seconds into their dialogue, and somebody said, "No, that's not going to." I said, "Hold it. This is what we agreed to." And it was kind of rough going. But once we did that, at the end of the session, I debriefed. One of our women executives says, "This is the first time I felt like I've been listened to." And so creating a platform, if you will, that forces people to say what's on their mind and others to listen is an example. Some specific questions that a leader can ask. Let's say the leader presents his or her plan, a project manager presents his or her timeline, and you look around the room and the person will say, "Is everybody on board? Does anybody disagree?" Silence, right? And you can tell from the eye contact that there's problems. And so a question that the leader, and sometimes you need a developmental facilitator, not a voice-activated magic marker that scribes notes, but someone that observes the process. And so the leader or the facilitator can say, John or Mary just presented their plan, all right? What's going to be the most challenging part to execute in this plan?
Nice.
And what you do is you give people permission now to open up and challenge. And so that's an example of a question that you could ask. Another one that I often use is, after people have gone through strategic planning, they come up and the plan is there and they come back 2 days later. A good question is asked, we're 6 months into the strategic plan, execution of the strategic plan. It went horribly wrong. What happened? And so it forces people to look at those areas that maybe did not get openly discussed in the meeting.
I love the way those questions come off, because they invite that criticism that is there, but people are reticent to do it. And because you've asked the question, people have that impetus to want to answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And another area is one-on-one feedback. Peer-to-peer feedback is the most important feedback because it's timely, it's observed in the moment. Both people are seeing the same thing. And research shows those organizations that have robust peer feedback programs are far more productive than those that don't. And so again, getting those undiscussables out.
So how have you seen peer feedback work well in an organization?
Yeah, well, it's not something that you bring in and say, okay, we're going to start having peer-to-peer feedback. We go through a training program, and we talk about what Argyris calls the ladder of inference. I'm just going to refer to them as mental models. We have mental models, we have assumptions about the way the world works. And that's the lens that we see the world through. And so I'll start off the session. I says, well, how do you see peer-to-peer feedback? Oh, I think it's great. Okay. I said, well, why don't we do it? Oh, well, John will get mad at me. Mary will, get angry. And I said, well, what is it that makes you think that will happen? And so we start getting people to think about their thinking. If we continue on with the assumption that John or Mary is going to get mad at me, that's single loop learning. And what I encourage people to do is double loop learning. Okay, what is it that makes me think that Mary is going to get mad? All right?
So that's the second loop, is to think about.
That's the second loop.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
An easy way to explain that is a thermostat in a house is single loop learning. All right, the temperature goes up, the little mercury pops down, and it turns the air conditioning off. That's single loop learning. Double loop learning is to ask the question, well, why is it set at 68 degrees? And so getting people to be reflective and think about their thinking is an important thing to do.
And so as you work with organizations to introduce more peer-to-peer learning, you start with that double
Yeah.
loop to get them to think about why they
Yeah.
aren't giving them feedback. And then
Yeah.
how do they kind of transition into that once they think through, well, because she got upset when I said this about her cupcakes or whatever the impetus was for them to kind of make that assumption. How do they get to the next step, to the next
Yeah.
level?
Well, um, and then I think the next step is to think about why they want to give feedback. Um, is it because they want to be one up, or do they have a genuine compassion for the person to help that person be better? Do I, as the receiver of feedback, will I allow myself to be vulnerable to hear what I need to hear? Right? Will I be curious? Right? And so, being vulnerable, being curious, and being compassionate. We talk about those values that you have to give that feedback, and it really brings about the whole concept of relationship and trust. And so then from that, we talk about how to give feedback and do it in a way that's non-judgmental. All right? Because, I can say, you just don't care. Well, that's a judgmental statement. Whereas I can say, Bob, when you cross your arms and you look away, I think you don't care. All right? And so that process then of giving feedback so that that information that people need to improve themselves gets discussed.
Very good, very good. And as you talk about the vulnerability and you talk about the empathy, the real desire to help somebody, does that click with people, or do you find that there's still people that keep those walls up?
Oh, yes, yeah. I think we grow up in a competitive society, right? And the object is to win, all right? If we want to become successful, we have to build learning organizations. We have to have a sincere curiosity, all right? I may know something, you may know something, and together we really see the full picture. And so taking on that frame of mind, it takes a while. It really does take a while. We go through practice sessions in the room and things like that. And what's interesting is to have the two dyads, they'll give each other feedback, and then we'll have them give them each other feedback on the way they went about it. And it's amazing. We tend initially to talk more about the good things, which is good, but it's still uncomfortable, getting that critique. So, it's like anything. Until we practice, we have to be forgiving and understand that, I didn't say that to be mean. I have to rephrase the way I said it so you don't think you're going to be mean. Yeah. So it is. I mean, it's a skilled learn set. It's a skill set that you have to learn over time. And if we just do it when we're giving feedback to peers, how about our children? How about our spouses, our partner, our friends? We have so many places where we can develop that skill and simultaneously develop the relationship and really create a learning environment between two people. So that's one of the things that both in those sessions and in the classes that I teach this semester's organizational change and consulting is, practice on building that relationship through dialogue, through conversation.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for going into the depth there. A while back when we spoke, you were telling me about a leadership team and their investors that you were working with. And I think that was a nice example of a success that can come from this kind of discussing the undiscussable. Would you mind sharing that story? I know you can't probably mention names and such.
Sure. Well, it was a relatively small but growing high-tech company. It was $20 million. And one of the board members had heard me speak at Louisville, a function about better conversations lead to better decisions. And he spoke to me afterwards and was wondering if I could come and help the board get through these decisions that they had to make. And I asked him to give me a little background on it. He says, well, we're at a point where we as investors have to decide to put more money into it to help it grow, to just get it into a position to where we can sell it or just manage it as a cash flow. And so I asked him to tell me a little bit about the board, and it was made up of an even number of people, which was an issue in terms of voting. They had 3 from the management team and 3 of the investors, and that was the voting members. But as he gave me the background on the investors, one of them was the CFO of a major insurance company, retired. Others had been in private business and very successful. So it just struck me, why couldn't these people come to a decision? So I asked him, I says, well, let me talk to the members of the board. And I'll do it. So I gathered information. And what I found was that the investors had thought management were country club managers. In other words, they went around the country entertaining, potential clients, etc. The senior managers thought the investors were only interested in the company for the money it could make. And so I asked during the interview, I said, did you all talk about that? Oh, no, we don't want to tick them off. Those weren't exactly the words they used, but they said, we don't want to start an argument. And so one of the things I assumed was, there was an issue of an undiscussable, how they felt about each other and what was driving their rationale for, as a board, to make their decisions. That's why they couldn't come. And so part of the agreement was I would maintain confidentiality, and I shared the information back. And I said, the thing that surprised me the most was, here's how the managers felt about you investors. Investors, hear how you felt about management. And as I was sharing that, they were sitting there shaking their heads, yes. And so I said, this is an example of undiscussables. And until you all gain an understanding of what your real intents are, we're not going to move forward. And so I went through a little training exercise on, mental models and, discussing the undiscussable, giving them background. And I said, one of the things we have to agree to do now is that nothing will be undiscussable. We will bring it into the room. That night, I got an email from the largest investor to me and the other board members breaching what we had agreed. He had only sent that message to us. I fired back a message to him. I said, look, this is not an agreement with what we said. All right, you violated that. The next morning he resigned from the board, and he said, I see now I'm part of the problem. And we had a discussion of how they felt about each other, and their mutual point of interest is they both wanted the company to be successful. And to make a long story short, once that was out, some of the tough issues then became discussed. And I got a call about 4 weeks later that they had found another investor who invested more money in the company, and they were set to grow. Very cool. A year later, they grew it to such a point, and they sold it for twice the amount that they thought they were going to sell it for.
Very cool.
So that was an example of getting that issue out.
Yeah. And isn't it funny, though, that people don't want to discuss things, but when they actually get to the point where they can, it usually ends up way better than I think it's going to.
Oh, yeah. Well, a key point from a management standpoint was, I'm going to lose my job. And the investor said, oh, no, we're going to take care of you. we're going to make sure that if somebody buys it, this management's going to stand because you've done a good job.
Yeah.
And so one of those is when those things get out, you know, there's kind of a, oh, I didn't know you felt that way.
Yeah. Now, do you see this at all levels of an organization? I mean, we were talking about a board, but do you see that at all levels of an organization?
Oh, absolutely. If I may digress for a minute,
Sure.
tell a personal story. My wife and I were at a basketball game, university basketball game, it was the biggest game of the year. Stadium was full. There was one seat empty, two seats behind us, and I saw two men coming up, kind of draped arm over arm, cups, and I leaned over to my wife and I said, these guys are drunk. They're going to sit behind us, going to spill beer all over us. My wife was a nurse, and as they got closer, she said, Bob, I think that one man had a stroke. Do you see how the corner of his mouth is sagging down? I think he's just helping him up. And so I share that story. My perception was totally wrong. And, I would be constantly, how I would behave was based upon that mental model I had. So it happens on the individual level, all the way up to the board. I think I see it most frequently, line level employees. They have an understandable concern about maybe being a whistleblower or saying things. I see it between peer groups. There's always a power struggle for resources, right? People in dollars. And so, making assumptions about where the other person is coming from. They're wrong, I'm right, So I think it happens throughout the organization. And I think the ability of people to create a dialogue and see those differences as an opportunity for learning, that we grow as people and our organizations grow and become successful and profitable.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to check my list here and see. One other thing. When you and I talked, you mentioned a book by Edgar Schein, Humble Inquiry, and that seemed to have a real resonance with you. What did you take away from that, and what can leaders take away from some of these ideas that you got from that book?
Yeah. Well, Schein is well known throughout academia and as well as in the business world in leadership and culture change in organizations. And his book, Humble Inquiry, is based on not only experience but years of research. And his thinking is that we spend more time telling than we do learning. Because when we're telling, the assumption is that we know. And the acronym today is VUCA. Our environment's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And no one person can possibly figure things out. And he says that going in with a genuine spirit of curiosity and wanting to learn and asking questions out of that sense, that we will get information that will help us see the entire picture. And so his book talks about not only the value of that, but then some of the ways that we can go about creating those types of conversations.
And so for leaders, that's so important as we're leading an organization or a group, to get that big picture, to have that curiosity.
Yeah, and let me give you a couple of reference points. I shared with you Dr. Cumberland's research at how much executives learn. She's doing a follow-up now is why aren't these voices being heard? Because when they're heard, it's too late. Share some research with you. Mankins and Steele did some research, and it's somewhat dated, 2005, that only 63% of the forecasted gains are achieved on strategies. McKinsey and Company did a study, and they asked, how much do you agree with this statement? Talking about strategic planning sessions. Participants feel free to discuss difficult issues openly and honestly, only 49%. Participants are willing to put aside their personal agendas. Only 20% agreed with that.
Wow.
So, and I may be drawing too loose of a connection. IT projects, only 32% succeed. I witnessed firsthand when I was doing work for an insurance company. We were doing a major revamp of the software. Everybody knew it was behind, but they wouldn't discuss it. And so if we don't have those types of discussions taking place, and if we don't ask, and if we're constantly in a telling mode, how do we learn the important information that we need from the right people to make astute judgments?
Very good. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, I think there's been a lot to absorb here, Bob, and very, very good content as far as what we can do to open up as leaders to get and to discuss those things that we need to discuss, even the undiscussable. So in this journey that you've been on from your own life as a leader and in training and development to teaching and the research and the academics and the consulting, what have been one or two pleasant surprises along the way that you've encountered?
Yeah. Well, one was that story I told about, the growing high-tech company where the major investor got up and said, "I see I'm part of the problem. I resign." I mean, it just, it blew me away. But he saw how he was holding back that group from truly learning from each other. And I think the second area is the feedback I get on the classes. These are night classes, students in their masters, and so they probably in their mid-30s or older. And they, at the end, they will say, what I've learned in this class about consulting, which is building relationships and having meaningful conversations, learning-filled conversations, has helped me not only in my business but in my personal life. And so, I'm not surprised to hear that anymore. I feel rewarded in some ways, if you will, that people are taking that to heart and creating those types of learning-filled dialogues as opposed to, jumping to conclusions.
Nice. Very nice. Well, Bob, are there any other last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience, or maybe a question you wish I'd asked that I didn't ask?
No. Other than I would urge your viewers to pick up Shine's book, Humble Inquiry. And the subtitle is The Art of Asking Instead of Telling. It's people that have read it have said, it's been a different way, to approach relationships. And my time over in Japan, I saw how important relationships are over there, and I think as we become more and more global, the majority of the world works on relationships. We have, I think, something like 100 more lawyers per capita or something like that, and over in Japan, because over in Japan they said, we've got a good relationship. I trust we'll work it out. And whereas here in the United States, we waste a lot of time in courts, decisions don't get made. Whereas I think if we can build those relationships, we truly can make a difference in our organizations.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for joining us on the podcast and sharing what you've learned and what you help other people learn. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.